Hello, my name is Ken Kinter. I'm an assistant professor at Rutgers University. And the purpose of this presentation is part one of a three-part presentation on motivational interviewing. In this one, we're going to be covering basic introduction and spirit. And as always, my contact information is on this slide. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns about this video. So before we get started, some credit where credit is due. The New Jersey Department of Health, in conjunction with Rutgers University, has been funding the State Hospital Psychiatric Rehabilitation Initiative. This is a joint effort to attempt to improve conditions in New Jersey state psychiatric hospitals for both patients and staff. We thank the Department of Health for their financial support, which makes our mission possible. So in this video, we're going to be taking on the first two steps of teaching about motivational interviewing. Now, if you do the full training, it's like a 3 or 4 day affair. So this is going to be a very abbreviated version of it, but hopefully you'll get some idea about motivational interviewing, get some tools that you can use. And also, if you're more interested, we'll give you some resources where you can go further with this. So today we're really going to be dealing predominantly with the spirit and method of motivational interviewing. And we'll be covering some of these other steps further on as we go. So let's start off with some very interesting points. And that is that people don't always act in their best interest. Having a heart attack doesn't mean that someone's going to change their habits. Having an alcohol-induced car accident may not be enough to convince somebody to stop drinking. Blindness and amputations may not be enough to cause someone to pay more attention to their blood sugar. Being incarcerated is not a deterrent from future crimes or future incarcerations. And last but not least, a trip to a New Jersey state psychiatric hospital, or in any other state for that matter, we've shown isn't enough to prevent people from treatment noncompliance and relapse and ultimately ending up back in the hospital again. So it's an interesting point that people engage in behaviors that don't really help themselves and actually in many occasions resist attempts to change those behaviors for the better. So let's talk about a couple foundational philosophical points about motivational interviewing before we go forward. And one is to refer to resistance as ambivalence. So we very often talk about people being resistant, treatment-resistant patients, treatment-resistant people, or the illness being treatment-resistant. In motivational interviewing, we talk more about ambivalence, and that reflects the idea that part of that person does want to change, part of that person doesn't want to change. In fact, not to get too far ahead, but we talk about how resistance is usually manufactured by the caregiver going past where the client is. You know, we're moving them along too fast, they're not ready to go, and digging in the heels is how that resistance is expressed. Motivational interviewing is a two-stage process regarding this ambivalence. The stage one, we build that ambivalence. We cause more discord or call attention to the discord between the behavior that person may be changing and how it's impacting them in their lives. So phase one is to develop and build that ambivalence. Stage two is to reduce it through actions that change that behavior and then, reduce that discrepancy. A point for me that's pretty critical about motivational interviewing is the idea of the double bind, in that people are stuck. If people feel like they have two negative choices, they're not going to be in too much of a hurry to choose either, and us trying to get them to choose one or the other isn't really going to work. My belief is that along with motivational interviewing, we have to keep talking about the problem. When we can fully understand why the client is where they are, why they're not making that change, why is that person not drinking, why is that person not taking care of their sugar, why is that person non-compliant with medication that's going to keep them out of the hospital? When we can see it from their side and fully understand it, then we're in a position to help that person and not before. Unfortunately, I believe we cheat that process a little bit and move right into fix-it mode, which isn't very helpful. So, and the writing reflex, the universe, we are all about fixing people, being their caregivers that we are, and trying to fix people. And we fix without listening. And that's a fundamental design flaw, which motivational interviewing, I believe, corrects. So we're going to talk about different clinical styles a little bit here. Some people are much more directive. Some people are much more supportive and following. Motivational interviewing tends to be much more toward the middle here in the guiding part of it. And it doesn't mean that your style is wrong or what you do is wrong, but the idea is to be able to identify when there's a particular type of client or type of situation that your predominant style doesn't help with. And so the goal is that motivational interviewing can give you a couple more tools so that you can reach that small population of people that you just don't have that effective connection with and that effective change with. I'm more concerned that you can cross sides of the line from directing to following and back again, that you can be versatile enough to change. I know in my own clinical work, I go from being very directive to being very supportive and very hands-off and then back again. And I wondered why that was. And it was me trying to meet the client where they were. But I need to be able to have the range to be able to do that. So I think that's an important part of this as well. Some more fundamental assumptions about motivational interviewing. And to me, this is part of the real gift of motivational interviewing and part of why it's been one of the most, I would say one of the most major changes I've made in my practice in 30 years of being in the field. How's this sound? You don't have to make change happen. You can't. The burden isn't on you to make the change happen. You know, in the metaphor is like you're a gardener. You create the conditions for change, but you don't actually cause that growth to happen. You remove the weeds and the rocks and you water and you do all that good stuff. You don't make the growth happen. You create an environment where growth can happen. And that's a very important difference. You don't have to come up with the answers. You probably don't have the best ones. And if the person isn't ready to hear it, I love the phenomenon where you read a book or see a movie that you're familiar with, because I read the same books and see the classic movies over and over again. And every now and again, I'll notice something different in it. Different thing in the book, different thing in the movie. And I'll go, where did that come from? Well, P.S., it was there the whole time. I was just ready to see it. I was just ready to notice it. I'm the one who changed. And I think people work the exact same way. How many times have you seen something in a book that you've already owned? You just go, wow. And you're ready for it at that point in time. So again, the pressure is off you to come up with the perfect answer, because even if the timing isn't right, the person isn't going to get it. And the metaphor that motivational interviewing uses most often is it's dancing. Dancing is two people moving together. Wrestling is force on force. If you are working with a client and you are trying to break them down through sheer force of will and it's you against them, first of all, you're going to be exhausted. And secondly, you force that client into a defensive position where they're just going to defend themselves. If you make yourself the advocate for change, then they become the advocate for staying the same, and you will lose. So the two people moving together is a much better metaphor, and I think it really does capture how motivational interviewing works. So as far as a more formal definition, motivational interviewing is a collaborative conversation style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. There's some important pieces in that. It's the person's motivation. We're tapping into the motivation that they have. And how are we going to deal with this? We're going to have a conversation with them about it. And really, this goes back to what we were talking about before, where in that phase one, we develop the discrepancy between them and the problem. And then in phase two, we reduce that discrepancy by their taking an action of their choice. So let's talk about what motivational interviewing isn't. It isn't just being nice to people. It's not rah, rah, let's change. It doesn't work that way. It's not motivational speaking, the people that give you a talk and then you go walk on hot coals and things like that. And it's not that. It's not stages of change. If you've seen some of the other videos in the series, there's a 2-part video on stages of change. Motivational interviewing to me works spectacularly with people in the earlier stages of change, pre-contemplation, contemplation, and preparation, but they're not synonymous. This is more about technique. Stages of change to me is assessing where someone is in the change continuum and then choosing your interventions. Motivational interviewing is a series of interventions that work very well with some of those stages. It's also not tricking people into changing. It's very interesting in that it's directive and non-directive at the same time. You direct the conversation, but you don't direct the action. And we'll talk more about that in subsequent videos. So the spirit of motivational interviewing is captured by these 4 concepts: partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation, otherwise known as PACE. So for each one of these, there's a quote that I really like that kind of goes hand in hand with it. Motivational interviewing is partnership. It's 2 people. You are the expert in what you know. The person is the expert in their life. And by forming the therapeutic relationship, a partnership is formed. And I love this quote from Dr. Amador. Why would anyone want to listen to you if you would not first listen to them? And again, we go right into fix and problem solving mode and we don't listen. And that doesn't help us. Motivational interviewing is done with, not for someone, not to someone. Acceptance. This goes back to, the Carl Rogers stuff. We accept the person the way they are. Even if they make decisions that we don't agree with, we're still going to be with them afterwards. And I love the quote, the other person should grow and unfold as they are. We're not deciding who this person's going to become. We accept them for who they are, not who we think they're going to be or who they can be, because ultimately it's their responsibility at the end of the day for who they become. It's that universal positive regard. Compassion. I love this. In fact, I'm not even going to read it. I'm going to save that one. I really like this one because compassion has to be done between equals. You feel the way, we know the way that our clients feel to a degree, not completely. We know what sadness feels like. We know what fear feels like. We know what anger feels like. We know those things. We don't know it exactly the way they know it from their circumstance, but we do have awareness of that. And that can help us to connect with them. But it can't be done from a position of superiority. I'm the person who has all the answers. You come to me, I'm going to help you. And of course, you're going to be grateful and do everything I say. That doesn't work. This speaks into this a little bit more about how we understand emotions by feeling them ourselves. I need to feel my own emotions and understand who I am. And that gives me a starting point to begin to understand how other people operate and to feel their feelings as I feel my own, to respect their sadness as much as I do my own. We could probably do a whole lot more work on this area, but we'd be wandering off the path a little bit. But the goal ultimately is compassionate behavior, acting in a way that's compassionate and helpful to others. This last one I love. This comes from Bill Miller. You have what you need, and together we will find it. I kind of borrow this in my own private practice. I tell clients, I said, okay, here's the bad news and here's the good news. The bad news is you brought all of your problems in here with you. The good news is you brought all the solutions in here as well. And it's my job to help you get them together. I like leading off like that. The main point of this is we're trying to get them to talk. If you see the Latin words down here, which I am not going to say incorrectly, it's less about teaching and more about drawing out, eliciting, the metaphor of water from the well. Instead of it being a more authoritarian, I'm going to tell you what you need to do sort of position. Now, motivational interviewing also has a process, and this is one of those things that sounds so simple, but it gets skipped a lot. The first step of this is engagement, creating that working alliance, the relationship that all change comes from. Next up, focusing. Why are you here? What are you here to work on? And making that a positive aspect where it is focusing on achieving a goal as opposed to overcoming some sort of deficit. Now, again, what happens if we focus in on the problem without building the relationship first? It's going to restrict the information that we get back. The person doesn't trust us yet, so we're not going to be able to fully engage in the process. 3, evoking, getting the story. This means that we, the helpers, listen and they talk. We can still guide the conversation from that position, but it's not us taking over the whole thing. And then the 4th stage finally is planning what and how to change. If you saw the stages of change series before this, it's where the change plan and preparation gets in effect. How are we going to change this? What are we changing? And what's the whole background for that? So in means of giving a practice assignment for here, this little script here of 5 questions, I would challenge you to bring this to either your next professional or personal interaction and see how this changes the conversation that you have. So if someone's talking about making a change, go right off the script, these 5 questions. Why do you want to make this change? How might you go about it in order to succeed? What are the 3 best reasons? How important is it for you to make this change? What do you think you'll do? This is all eliciting. This is all evoking. There's no advice giving in here. There's no suggestions in here. There's no judgment in here. Give this one a shot. It's completely open-ended. I guarantee if you do it this way, first of all, this will be different from any conversation you've had with this person in the past. But I also will guarantee you will learn something about that person's change process, whether it's a reason to change or a reason against change. You will learn something from doing it this way, because what we've done is we've taken us out of it. our advice, our experience. We are being transparent and just sending it back to them. The idea is they're trying to change. Our only assignment is to deal with the barriers that come up, but otherwise to leave them in charge of the change process. And that's a significant shift from how most of us were trained. So just to wrap up this part of the video, the whys of motivational interviewing are people don't always act in their best interest. People have valid reasons to not change. They might not even know what they are. Our usual style doesn't work for 100% of the people, 100% of the time. And that nasty little we try to fix rather than hear the person. The definition of motivational interviewing about having conversations about change, and that conversation guides that person in the direction of change. And we have the component parts here of the spirit and method of motivational interviewing, the partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation, engagement, focusing, evoking, and planning. So these are the pieces that we've talked about today. Subsequent videos, there are 2 more videos in this series. I welcome you to see those. Here's the information where we got this presentation from. A special shout out to Bill Miller, who gave us the original version of these slides to use. We've updated them since then. And if you want additional information about motivational interviewing, motivationalinterviewing.org is a really great place to start in terms of trainings and other materials, basically all things motivational interviewing. So I thank you for your time. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I hope you catch another one of these videos coming up soon. And you've got my contact information if you have any questions. Take care.